What the Democrats have done in utterly vilifying Trump and Trumpism, they've really created a bad situation at all levels of society. And they don't realize that. Right? They just think, oh, no, we're just trying to nip this in the bud, and, you know? And it's like, well, you're exacerbating it way beyond. Because Trump doesn't want to, like, you know, like, look, I was watching an interview with J.D. Vance and Trump together. And J.D. Vance is, like, chomping at the bit. He's like, well, we're going to get rid of the deep state, right? We're going to get rid of the deep state. And Trump's like, yeah, well, we might get around to that. You know what I mean? Because it's kind of like, what are you talking about, really? You can't get rid of the deep state. Like, Trump knows that.
Welcome to the Cutrone Zone again. With me today is the last Marxist, Chris Cutrone, as always. We're both just back from the RNC, visiting the enemy camp. We'll be visiting the other enemy camp in Chicago.
Where I live. I live behind enemy lines.
Right. So, yeah, there's a lot to talk about, not just our trip to the RNC. In fact, I think that we can skip talking about. There's been so much news that we haven't really been able to talk about, you and I, one-on-one. But I thought I'd start by, I mean, Kamala Harris is now the nominee, it looks like, although that's not entirely clear, but it looks like she's the nominee. And there's a tweet I saw. Somebody says that Trump Vance is boomer Gen X coded, and Kamala is millennial Zoomer coded. And this person says, I think the Xers are a little too convinced of their inevitable victory. There's hubris in the Trump camp. And I think the Silicon Valley VC types are showing their hand too soon, and will face retribution by the state for doing so. So what do you make of that tweet? I mean, there's a lot there, different parts to it, but what do you make of that, Chris?
Well, look, this is some kind of last gasp of millennial melancholy, right? So, you know, we're dealing with the long aftermath of the death of the millennial left, and everything is seen in those terms. And, you know, the Trump era has dominated a lot of even the millennial generation, but certainly the Zoomer generation. And so, you know, the idea that, Kamala is Gen X. She's our age. And so it's just silly because Vance is the first millennial candidate. And, you know, Trump's setting him up to inherit the presidency from him in 4 years, which I think is very likely. I think that we're looking at 12 years of Republican presidents. And it's going to be Trump and Vance.
Did you see my stream yesterday or my tweets about this, about the generational politics?
I did not see. I listened to you and Ashley on the Sublation show. I didn't see the tweets, so I don't know what.
You know my stance. Like, I'm on board with Kamala because
you're coconut pilled.
Yeah, I want.
I thought you were Cutrone pilled, but now you're coconut pilled.
Well, you know, when it's a matter of taking pills, it can.
At least it still starts with a C.
Yeah, but no. What I thought was, you know, she's Gen X, I'm Gen X. It's time for there to be this historic moment.
I insist Obama was Gen X.
Yeah, he was born in 1961. That's too soon. 64 is technically still boomer, but I'm counting her as...
he's Gen X. He's Gen X. I mean, it's, you know, Obama blew the chance for Gen X.
Okay, if you say so, but I mean, I just want to be pedantic when it benefits me, and not pedantic when it doesn't. So pedantically,
how well do you relate? How well do you relate to Kamala Harris? Like, in other words, if she were in your friendship circle network, you know, like, you know, she's getting off work at the bar when you and your friends are hanging out. You and your girlfriend go to the bar, and she sees, you know, her friend Kamala Harris. How do you relate to this person?
I'll answer it this way. My girlfriend likes Kamala.
Well, of course she does. That's what I'm saying, right? So if Kamala Harris had become a psychotherapist instead of a prosecutor.
Yeah, she would fit into this milieu, although I'm a grungy slacker Gen X, not the
Yeah, me too.
professional.
Me too. Obviously, me
Right.
too. So, like I could know Kamala Harris if she became a college professor instead of a prosecutor,
Mm-hmm.
and she would have tenure, and I don't.
That's
And
right.
basically, I would wonder whether that's because she's a black woman and I'm a white man,
Oh yeah, so you might be headed over to the millennial camp.
right? And
There's all
then,
that racial resentment that's building up in you.
yeah, I mean, I would just take that for granted, actually. And then I would just, and then her attitude towards me is, yeah, white guys can be grungy. They can afford to, we have to, be impressive and dress well. We can't be slackers. Society doesn't let a black woman be a slacker. So fuck you, white man.
They don't. Yeah. Okay. I don't
Right?
want to go.
So,
into that.
I know exactly what that kind of, if we're passing each other in the hallway at school
Mhm.
and we say hello to each other, I know exactly what the unconscious communication is going to be. It's going to be like,
Right.
yeah, white privilege, DEI hire.
I want to point out to you that my embrace of Kamala was entirely ironic.
I would hope.
Yeah,
I mean, don't.
But the point is,
me...
what I'm underlining is the idea that we should be voting based on our personal identification with a.
That's all the Democrats have, Doug. That's all that they have. That's the only thing they've got. The only thing, and Kamala is just an unlikely candidate. They tried it with Hillary. Don't they understand women don't like Hillary?
A lot of them
women don't like Kamala. In other words, if they like Hillary or if they like Kamala, it's deeply ambivalent.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they force themselves to like women who like Hillary and women who like Kamala, they have to force themselves to like them.
Right. I mean it's like her laugh, right? That forced laugh.
I know if we don't like her laugh, then we're sexist. No, I mean Catherine Liu.
Mm-hmm.
Girl boss energy. Girl boss energy. Nobody likes the girl boss. Nobody. Women don't like the girl boss unless they're forced to. Right? In other words,
are you saying Catherine Liu has girl boss energy? Is that what you're saying?
She does not. No, her analysis of Hillary.
Oh, I see. Okay. Right.
So
well, no one likes a boss. Ultimately,
nobody likes a boss. I mean, they can tolerate a boss. Like I remember Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, and what made that so horrible is that he was just like your boss, right? In other words, like you could just see that happening, right? Like it's not like the White House. It's like, okay, any like middle-aged manager and his young female employee, happening everywhere all the time. Right? That's what made it really unacceptable. And, his attitude was probably, I mean, I know this isn't true, but his attitude was probably, at least I waited to get to the White House to be in the Oval Office before I did that shit. Don't I deserve it? Don't I deserve it now?
No, I know that he did that's the case. Yeah.
No, it's not the case. But, just dealt with discreetly. I do think that, Monica Lewinsky was every young female employee and Bill Clinton was every middle-aged man boss.
Yeah. Well, yes, I think that we're still dealing with the after effects of all of that, but it's been sublimated or filtered through Trump. So now...
Yeah, well, Trump's just off the reservation. He's off the chain. He's like in a different category, And so like he's like The Apprentice or whatever, like you're fired. Like nobody has had a boss like Trump. Like he's not a boss. I mean the thing is we are dealing with the PMC. Trump is not PMC, Kamala is. Obama is. Hillary was. Bill was. They are PMC. Trump is not. Trump is some freakazoid, like he's some silver spoon inheritor of wealth, but he's also some tacky nouveau riche gold toilet, right? Like he's just something else.
Yeah, I mean, I've encountered people like Trump in my life before.
I've never encountered anyone like Trump. I mean, I guess I have. No, that's not true. I've met like benefactors of like museums, and I met like the Christians.
I used to go door to door for an environmental group called Osberg. And I don't remember exactly where it was in Oregon, but there was one neighborhood which was actually right on a golf course, and everyone in that neighborhood was wealthy. A lot of like lawyers and dentists and doctors.
Is that
older.
wealthy?
I think those people are wealthy. Yeah.
Not really. You know, a millionaire isn't what it used to be.
Right, that's true.
Like you have to be a billionaire today to be a millionaire of the Great Gatsby.
Well, okay, I understand that, but these people were they consider themselves wealthy. There's a scene from Wall Street where
they're upper middle class,
where Gordon Gekko is telling Charlie Sheen, I think it is. Is that who was in Wall Street?
Yeah. Martin Sheen.
You can be rich. I don't mean like fly first class, have a comfortable life, never have to want for anything rich. That's not what I mean. I mean rich like you can buy and sell companies every day, like you can make the world run. Rich.
Oh, right.
Different. So when I say wealthy, I just mean, relatively affluent, comfortable.
You think that they fly first class all the time, or fly business class all the time?
The wealthy?
No, the people you were going door to door.
I think that in this neighborhood, not all of them, but in this neighborhood where they lived on a golf course, yeah, I think that they would fly first class. Maybe not that often, but when I say
I haven't met such people, of course I've met such people. What I mean is that I haven't really known such people.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know these people well, but I got invited in for a glass of water. I pitched them to become members. I saw
So we're back to it. How do you relate to your generational cohort? In other words, how do you relate to your Mama La Kamala?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're at West Coast. She's West Coast, right?
Mm-hmm.
East Coast, West Coast. What's up? How did you relate?
Well, I'll tell you, whenever I see Hillary Clinton or Kamala, I remember working for the Oregon Symphony. And I was in the office for many years.
Sure. Right.
These were not just the patrons, the managers.
Managers, that's right. No.
Right, the people. Right, the people who would take jobs with nonprofits, art organizations.
Yeah, running
husbands. Usually ran like bigger businesses. They were really pretty wealthy, but this was their terrain to rule. And they had cookies were very important. If there was a meeting, there was always cookies, and they made a big deal about the cookies. They wore track suits or jumpsuits like Hillary would wear. There was always a feeling like everything they were saying was a lie. And they weren't good at lying, they were. So they would come. Yeah, it was the amount of disdain that was generated over the years for these kinds of people was tremendous in me. Because they weren't even particularly competent at being.
The reason I invoke Catherine Liu is that she's our generation too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that our image of someone like Kamala is someone who is a boomer.
Mm-hmm.
And we just have to remember that now Gen X is in charge. Mm-hmm. Gen X is in charge, like Anthony Blinken, like who's running the Biden administration? Gen X, and then some millennials, right? So the millennials are definitely the staffers, but like there are important cabinet secretaries who are Gen X and who do have, a say in policy, right? By the way, we're going to get into this because I feel like we need to address, a number of things about the election. So right now we've been somewhat frivolous.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhat. We've been extremely frivolous.
Right.
So, because I was thinking about, going to the RNC, you and I went, and we brought younger people. We were the old people. And, and I was aiming at giving everyone an experience, including you, right? I wanted you to have an experience. For me, it wasn't really an experience, but I felt like for you, and especially for the young people, it was an experience. Making it real in the flesh, politics. And, but, what passes for politics, meaning the Republican National Convention is, Republican, right? And we're going to go to like Democraticon, Fellini's Satyricon, we're going to go to the convention, like the fan convention, right? Whatever, right? And they are fans, aren't they? The Republicans, they are fanboys, right? Mm-hmm. And we're going to be dealing with an even stranger group of people who are fans of the Democratic Party, right? And, your coconut pilled, your K-Hive, Kamala Hive, right? And, and you and I were doing this kind of, niche market podcast, Marxism, blah, blah, blah. The left is fanboys too. The left is fanboys, but just of a kind of, politically pointless variety, as opposed to the fanboys and fangirls of the capitalist political parties, right? But they are kind of like that. And, so Ed Remus, who helped us set up a lot of our interviews, and who is a kind of a producer or assistant producer on the project, I would say even. He's sort of making things happen that way. And at least at a conceptual level, but also at a practical level, he made a comment about the Never Trumper mini convention that you guys attended.
Oh, yeah, so sad. So sad.
Well, but he said it was shocking to him that the former leaders of the Republican Party were reduced to the same status as like a leftist sect. Like if you go to like an ISO conference back in the day, it was even smaller than that. And I said, yeah, of course, this can happen. Like people who used to be, apparently in the driver's seat of politics could fall out of favor, become marginalized, and then they're just left defending some peculiar principles and ideas, and also have some ideas about the way things should be done at a practical level. And nobody's paying any attention. History has left them behind, and that's what Marxism has been for a long time. They used to be mass socialist parties, and now it's reduced to the same status as the Never Trumpers.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good way to think of it. When you say you wanted me to have the experience, I mean, I feel like I've had political experiences in the past, but never at these conventions. But what had prepared you for it, or what have you been to these conventions in the past, or what?
No, but I've been around people in the penumbra of the Democratic Party. And so I've had a sense of, I just had a sense of what it was going to be about, what it was going to be like, and also I, unlike maybe the rest of you, I don't feel at all alienated from the Republicans or the Trumpites or whatever, like Hulk Hogan was like, listen, Trumpites, after he tore off his shirt and did his whole performance, he's like, listen, Trumpites, and I just have a sense of it culturally, just because I've immersed myself for the last 8 years, watching Fox News, but paying attention to, the kind of, I don't know, dissident right, not alt-right, but dissident right kind of people. And then I know also from my background, so I was talking with Spencer Leonard about this. There was a time when in New York or in California, there was one Republican senator and one Democrat senator, and the governorship rotated between the two parties. And I grew up on Long Island in the county that was basically the seat of the Republican Party in New York State, and that's Nassau County. So Senator Paul D'Amato was from there. And, for a long time, and I think that they now have a Republican county executive again. But the Democrats have, basically taken over the New York State, and for the most part, and the way they've taken over California and other places. So we were talking about the fact that the red state, blue state thing is really like an Obama era thing. It's very recent.
Well, it didn't really emerge with Bush Gore, the red, blue.
The language of it, but I feel like it's become like, I don't know, institutionalized in a way that back then, was like swing states, reliably Democrat, reliably Republican, but now it's like solid, and you can't even imagine a victory the way Nixon had or the way Reagan had, where they just won 49 out of the 50 states. You just can't imagine that ever happening. And that's different, and it gives a different flavor to things. But anyway, I grew up around Republicans, and my family, working class family. So what does that mean? Not political. And by the way, not very hostile to Biden. So they voted for Obama, they voted for Trump, but they were willing to give Biden a chance when he won the election. Just not partisan, not like committed to a party, not like that. But I did grow up around people who were more partisan, and they were Republican. And, I kind of know the shtick. I know the culture. I know the vibe, if you will. I think that we were talking about that a lot of it was vibe. What we're getting from the RNC and from the DNC in filming is vibe.
Right.
So
to speak to that for a moment, the vibe was certainly not authoritarian and threatening and
no, of
violent.
course not.
No.
When you guys were at the Never Trumper dinner, we had a conversation at our home base, that bar where we were set up, as our break space between shoots. And, these people came in, and they they were straight people, total white straight people, older people, boomer generation, but maybe like to have a good time, I don't know. They got into a conversation with me. For some reason, they decided to strike up a conversation about having trans ruin the gay community. And I was like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, they were just like, we remember when gays were fun. What happened? The trans have made LGBTQ not fun anymore. And this is the Republican Party. Right? Meaning it is not what Democrats think. The point of the matter is Democrats know better. Like, our audience are Democrats. They know better, but they don't let themselves know better.
Right.
And so they just have an imaginary enemy in their mind. And, and I just feel like that's not the reality. And we're really dealing with like just the nuts and bolts capitalist politics. And there's a lot of opportunism, and it's not like really about cultural affinity. It really is not. And these are strange people, capitalist politicians, the political class. This language that, like, I don't know, J.D. Vance or Vivek Ramaswamy, the political class. This kind of Burnhamite kind of thing.
Used to be the language of Noam Chomsky, though, as well.
Sure. Well, because he's got his own coordinator class idea. So the political class, I mean, they are some odd ducks. They are, and Kamala is one of those people.
Right.
But clearly one of those people. And Trump is not.
And to go back to something I said that was kind of frivolous before, but one of the things about the political class that is somewhat surprising is that they are not particularly erudite or
no, they're probably the most Philistine people.
Yeah, they're rather Philistine. Yeah, they're the kinds of people that would call target maybe, but that's it. That's as far as it goes. And they're averse to. They just seem to averse to thought, and sort of. If I were going to psychoanalyze them, I would say that they make a habit out of self-deceit. That kind of defines their modus operandi in the world.
That's the horror of it. And by the way, that's maybe what Adorno meant by the authoritarian personality, rather than like fascists, true believers. It's more like this. It's more like people who are just, in a sense, shut down.
Right. Yeah. And that's what is so disturbing to me right now, as I'm on Twitter and inundating myself with I think basically the Democratic Party for the most part, and the worst of the
both parties are like this.
Yeah.
Both parties are like this. I mean, occasionally you'll get. I mean, look. So what has happened since we talked last? So I was on the Sublation live stream from the RNC in Milwaukee last week, but then we did a Cutrone zone the week before that, and so a lot has happened. Obviously, the assassination attempt happened.
This is what I want to talk about. Yeah, this is I was leading.
We can come back around to that. But J.D. Vance as VP pick, which I saw coming. I thought so. I don't know if I ever said it in the podcast, but I thought it was a pretty good, chance that this was going to happen. Now he's an interesting character because he's like Peter Thiel kind of venture capitalist kind of, and more like an intellectual. There are these strange people. I mean, they're another group of strange people, like your Vivek Ramaswamy or your J.D. Vance or your Peter Thiel type people. And, so they aren't that, right? In other words, they're willing to talk about ideas, but the ideas are going to be super crackpot, super cranky. I guess I'll say this publicly. I was going to say it to you privately. We should arrange to have me debate Curtis Yarvin.
Oh, yeah.
Marxism versus monarchism. And we should talk about Bonapartism because I feel primed for it, and I feel like he's an interesting character, and he's debated Ben Burgess, and I think that their debate was essentially two flavors of Bonapartism. Right, so he tries to get some frisson out of people with like anti-democracy or something, but really that's not what it's about. It's about Bonapartism. And he had endorsed Biden as a Bonapartist candidate. I think he was a disaffected Trump supporter who then flipped over to Biden. And I don't know if he can make the leap to Kamala. Kamala may not be convincing to him as a Bonapartist because she's not. But so, that kind of like people in capitalist politics who have ideas, that might be worse than people who don't have ideas. Like there's a certain horror to the people with no ideas. It's a little bit Eichmann in Jerusalem kind of thing, but then the people who have ideas, it's like, oh boy.
Well, I'm going to resist my natural inclination here and try to get to the assassination attempt, because maybe this is one of my ideas. I'll try to combine these two ideas. One of my ideas is that we should be concerned about how much space and ability there is within general society for us to be politically engaged and informed and able to make decisions and participate. I don't think this as a Marxist, but just sort of reflexively, right? And I have been, I was disturbed by the left's reaction to the Twitter files because I just thought that was beyond the pale. I couldn't believe it. But the response to the assassination attempt on Trump is, on the one hand, somehow more understandable that the left is failing to pick it up properly, but also more monstrous. So,
how so? And what do you mean by the left?
Well, good question. I have yet to see many. I mean, AOC was pretty good when she was interrogating the head of the Secret Service, but I have not seen many or any people on the left note the obvious continuity between, let's say, Russiagate, lawfare, assassination attempt. I'm not saying that I know for a fact that the state was responsible, but at the very least, we know that the Secret Service was negligent in providing security, and from my way of thinking, that was a historic moment when Trump was nearly killed, and that it needed to be thought about and taken up. And
so I wanted to acknowledge a couple of things about this. So I think that I mentioned this to you when we were in Milwaukee together, that for you and I, somehow political assassinations are normal, meaning there was an attempt on Reagan's life. This was not within our lifetime, and yet
Gerald Ford as well.
Oh, Gerald Ford. Okay, there was an assassination attempt. I had forgotten about that. But I'm thinking, RFK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, JFK, George
Mhm.
Wallace,
Mm-hmm.
George Wallace, both before our lifetime and when we were too young to really be aware of it. But I think that in the culture, I was thinking about how, you have your affinity for situationism and how, talk about a vibe, like the 60s and 70s, right? And, Guy Debord being in Gaullist France. And yet de Gaulle was sort of not, it's not like he was really a strong man. It wasn't like that,
Mm-hmm.
It was more like he was this symbol, and he was a politician, and he did run things, and he did, orchestrate politics. But I feel like still, even under the Gaullist state, with this very charismatic, heroic, strongman figure at the helm, for many, many years, like he just ran France forever.
Mm-hmm.
That still what impressed someone like Guy Debord was how no one was really in charge. In other words, the bureaucracy was in charge, which meant that no one was in charge. And, so I think that that's the other point that I would make about like Bonapartism. And, something that we've talked about, I think that we talked about on the stream last week with Ben Studebaker about like, I don't know, the czarist bureaucracy, like people trying to have their bureaucratic rivals assassinated by their terrorists that they're sponsoring who are agent provocateurs without knowing that that's what they are, and that kind of thing. And that's very close to the Guy Debord world, right? Like the Algeria War and the French who set off bombs in Paris because they didn't want de Gaulle to pull out of Algeria.
Right. And
like
the Day of the Jackal is all about
absolutely all the movies, the parallax view, right? Like all these movies that are about, do we even know what reality is? Like this kind of Kafkaesque world. And it's not because we don't know what reality is. It isn't like an epistemic issue. It's more like the opacity of a bureaucratized society is such that nobody really knows what's going on.
Right. And that's what that's driven my politics. That has informed my political point of view and my art, my
that is Bonapartism. That is Bonapartism, because I was flashing on an idea that Marx had in the 18th Brumaire, which is the actor playing a hero's part and the hero playing an actor's part. Like he's got this little dialectical reversal, and it's about Napoleon the First versus Napoleon the Third. It's about Napoleon Bonaparte versus Louis Bonaparte, and it's about like playing a role. It's a very Hegelian kind of idea that like, well, the person might be venally motivated, might have small man syndrome, might have a narcissistic chip on his shoulder, like Joaquin Phoenix in the movie, not a good movie about Napoleon. But that doesn't matter. He's still a world historic figure. He was still world history on horseback. He was still the world soul that Hegel saw marching through Vienna, right? And but that actually it's inverted in capitalism, right? And that's what we're really dealing with, meaning that we can't take that kind of Hegelian view of the individual role in history and apply it to capitalist politics in the same way. And the reason for that is because of the changed role of politics, of the state, but really the changed reality of capitalism. In other words, it's capitalism itself that creates this effect, right? And the idea that it would be a total inverted world, if you will, like again from Das Kapital, the phantasmagoria. What we're talking about with capitalist politics and with Bonapartism is the phantasmagoria of the political world, as opposed to the phantasmagoria of the economic world. But they're both phantasmagorical.
Yeah, okay.
Alienation in politics, not just alienation in economics.
Right.
Alienated politics.
Right. And that means that rather than voting for a person who is going to lead, you're voting for a role, someone to fill a role that will function roughly the same way regardless of who gets to play the part.
This is actually what I wanted to talk to you about. So I was thinking about like supposed Marxist neutrality with regard to capitalist politics and what that's about.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that you and I might have a difficulty thinking about what the meaning of that is, and then certainly our audience have very difficult time thinking about this. So first thing that I wanted to say is the difference between policy and politics.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I write about this. I'm not sure exactly which essay, but it's in the Marxism and Politics book, that it's not just what's done, but who's doing it when thinking about social change, social transformation. So, you know, the idea that the working class has to change capitalism has to do with them playing a political role that they don't play now. And so they might do some similar surface level, you know, similar policies as like a PMC technocrat might try to do, a social democratic kind of capitalist technocrat might do now, but it will have an entirely different meaning because it will be the organized working class doing it. Right? And so politics and policy, not what's done simply, but who's doing it. And so I think that the way it's usually misconstrued on the Marxist left is, well, we don't care about capitalist politics because it's all the ruling class and it's just two wings of the ruling class and this kind of thing, right? And it's like, well, but then people will say, but they care about the policies, you know, harm reduction, you know, like it matters to people concretely in their everyday life, how expensive things are, or whether they have access to healthcare, or what have you, right? And then they kind of reason their way back into this position of, well, we know that capitalist politics is bullshit, but we do have to vote for this party or that party based on the policies. Right. And I think that really it's like political neutrality. It's not like we would say it doesn't matter what they do. It does matter what they do. It's consequential. I don't know if you caught this news item. So Elon Musk is trying to drum up support for the Republican Party in Silicon Valley. And he, like Peter Thiel and maybe J.D. Vance, and maybe Vivek Ramaswamy in his own way, they want the Republican Party maybe to shift from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. Right? Because otherwise you might think the opposite, which is that the Republicans are Wall Street and the Democrats are Silicon Valley. Of both parties are both, obviously. You know, and I think in the period of the Great Recession, the idea was, oh, well, the Democrats are too much the party of Wall Street still. And I feel like Bernie Sanders' campaign was all about that. It's disenchantment with Obama because he bailed out Wall Street rather than Main Street. And then people projected this onto Trump, that Trump was somehow Main Street capitalism versus Wall Street capitalism. You know, was productive capital versus finance capital. And it wasn't just the MAGA communists who had that idea. Boris Kagarlitsky had that idea. And, you know, so, okay, so let's say that this is, you know, we were talking about Bonapartism. Let's leave that aside for a second. Let's go back to a more old-fashioned traditional Marxist idea, which is that capitalist politics represents factions of the ruling class. Well, it might matter which faction of the ruling class gets the upper hand, who has policies favoring them, what's actually done. That might matter. It's certainly consequential at a concrete material level. And so, you know, you drum up support for certain policies, you look for constituencies to support certain policies. And I think that we have this idea that, like, oh, the state, the politicians, the political class, that they are serving the capitalist class. Maybe, maybe not, right? So politicians might be just politicians, and they might have to find support in the ruling class, right? So they may not just be creatures of the capitalist class. You know, I think people like to say that, I don't know, Biden is a creature of the credit card companies, which are all located in Delaware because of some tax haven status of the state of Delaware or something. So he's like the senator from MasterCard or something. I forget that's like a phrase, right? And it's like, okay, maybe, but no. Let's say that these are politicians, and what they're good at is winning elections. And in order to win elections, they have to find donors, sponsors, but also, maybe more importantly, after they're elected, they have to find support for their policies. Right? And so it also goes the other way, and that they can switch. So politicians can switch. They can be leaning on the support of one faction of the capitalist class, or one constituency of civil society. They can switch. And really what they're in it for is their political survival. Right? And they do probably have ideas about the way things should go and what the possibilities are, and what policies should be taken up. So I think that distinguishing between politics and policy, and also distinguishing between the role of parts of the ruling class that might favor certain policies versus politicians, like capitalist politicians, I don't know, J.D. Vance, the fact that he has like a working class background, right? Hillbilly elegy. Does that change his perspective on things? Did it change Biden's perspective on things, being from Scranton, also being from a working class background? Like, I think that we get into this kind of stuff, and it's not that stuff doesn't matter. It does matter. But rather, how do we parse it out, right? So rather than just flatten it and just sort of readily identify it, it's obviously in the realm of identity politics, raised by Kamala, we're supposed to believe that she is a black woman, as if all women are the same, and all blacks are the same, and all black women are the same, and all black women of a certain class are the same. No, obviously not. Right? Like that tells us almost nothing about this. So the neutrality towards capitalist politics, it operates at different levels. And so it's not like, well, we don't care whether it's Wall Street or Silicon Valley, or we don't care whether they do this policy or that policy, because it's all serving the capitalist class anyway. Just tactical differences in the capitalist class. Now, these things might matter. Like the future of American capitalism might be decided by a presidential election. It might actually be. And
no, it has been in the past, right?
Right.
I mean, it seems to have been.
So it matters, but it doesn't help us do what we have to do. In other words, our neutrality is based on the fact that we might favor some policies over other policies, but ultimately none of it does anything to help build a socialist party and help the working class take power. That's really the issue. I mean, I think the other point that I wanted to make about this, about policies, is that, we are Gen X. And so what does that mean? We are kind of Reagan era children. And I don't know if you remember that Bill and Hillary, they said something about Obama when she was running against him in the primaries in 2008, that he might be too much of a Reaganite because he is more Gen X than a boomer. In other words, that he might take certain things for granted that shouldn't be taken for granted. He might implicitly agree with Reaganism in a way that they don't.
He outright said that Reagan was his model.
Well, he did say that too, but just at a more fundamental level, I felt like they, as a generational difference between Bill and Hillary on the one hand and Obama on the other hand, that they might have been like, oh, this guy, he doesn't know, what's what. He doesn't know the way things really work. We do. He might take certain things for granted. So I was thinking about how we talk about things and what we might implicitly take for granted, or implicitly suggest that we assume that we ought not to. Namely, that government policies never work. Right? Like, we're living in a time of like government dysfunction, like basically since the 70s. And the Reaganism was something like, get the government out of things, privatize, right? Don't rely on government policy, right? Let society do it, let the free market do it, neoliberalism. So we might have this idea that policies are ineffectual. The government is fundamentally feckless and ineffective. But then we might assume that somehow what the capitalists do is effective, right? We might think, oh, well, Fauci, tried to lock us down and put on the masks and make us take this experimental vaccine, and it didn't work. but Elon Musk is going to get us to Mars, right? Like we might think, oh, well, that somehow what the capitalists do somehow works out, but what the government does somehow doesn't work out.
Well, can I
Yeah.
respond? Just to defend Gen X maybe a little bit, especially myself, what I would say is that I don't assume that government policy doesn't work, because my understanding of neoliberalism, and I think it's yours as well, is that neoliberalism was government policy, and it did work.
Yep.
And capitalism needing neoliberal policies was indicating the weakness of the capitalist sector rather than its strength and dominance. And that's something that a lot of people who might have supported Bernie Sanders, and certainly like in the late 90s, early 2000s, didn't believe. I read a book called The Corporation, I think it was a science fiction novel. It was very fun. And it was all about this idea that the corporation was going to come up and rule the world, and there would be no more government. And it was thinking, that, international corporations were more powerful than government. It was written from the point of view of some marketing guy in one of these corporations, right? But that was actually Democratic Party propaganda during the neoliberal era, which they were
opposing.
They were opposing neoliberalism, but they were also at the same time really supporting neoliberalism.
Was the novel dystopian? Was the novel like saying this is bad? Okay.
Oh yeah, it was a dystopian novel.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, right. So no,
RoboCop.
Right. It was a dark comedy. It was, so I don't believe that policy doesn't work. But I do think, and tell me this is wrong, that policy works from both sides in a way that, and I'll give an example. The way in which abortion is being debated right now overlooks or obscures how much agreement there is between the Republicans and the Democrats on the issue of abortion. Trump is promising not to push forward a national abortion ban, and receiving pressure from his own party, the activists within his own party, and some flack for that.
So the
same time, let me get to the other side of it. The Democrats, on the same time, are promising to fight abortion bans on the state level, and to get rid of something called the Hyde Amendment, which makes it difficult to get federal funding for abortion clinics and to provide abortions through federal healthcare programs and things like that. Medicaid. But they're not promising any codification of Roe versus Wade on a federal level.
They can't, because it's 10th Amendment, right?
Yeah. So they agree what the terms of the fight are going to be. And it's going to happen on the state level. And that means that the presidency is not particularly it's not really that relevant.
It takes the presidency out of it.
Right. But
except for the fact that the president as a candidate is a standard bearer for down ballot elections for the parties.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's really important too. Right. So it's a mobilization thing. And I think that that's part of, we saw some anti-abortion protesters at the RNC who were complaining about the Trumpian Republican Party not being anti-abortion enough.
Right.
But I wanted to say something about this. So the Dodd decision, overturning Roe versus Wade, happens at a time, and it's fairly recent time, when the vast majority of abortions are pharmacological, not surgical. And so the basic idea is, look, it's on the woman to be responsible enough to take the pill and not need a surgical abortion. That's what it really comes down to. And the fact that Trump has walked that line exactly, right? Which is to say that the regulation of surgical abortion is something else. Meaning all medical procedures are regulated at the state level. All. Right? There's no such thing as an unregulated medical procedure. There certainly is no such thing as an unregulated surgical procedure. No. Because you have to sign a form when you go in for surgery saying that you're not going to call the cops and say that they assaulted you because they cut into your body.
Right.
You ever see that form?
No, I haven't undergone surgery.
You haven't undergone any surgery?
My
battery.
did.
Battery. It's battery. So you sign ahead of time, no, the doctor's not committing battery against me. It's not assault and battery. It's surgery. Because otherwise, it technically is assault and battery.
Right.
If they do it without your consent, it's assault and battery.
Right.
Right? So it's regulated, and it's regulated at the state level at the same way that violent crime, murder, assault and battery are regulated at the state level. So surgery is regulated there. But now pharmacology is a little different. Mm-hmm. That's more of a federal thing. And that has to do with the FDA and things like that. Mm-hmm. Right? And so that is where they have some power, actually, the federal government. Mm-hmm. And Trump just promised, well, of course, we're not going to touch that.
Right. So, okay. So, and you have to believe Trump isn't lying and isn't going to...
Of course he's not lying. He doesn't care about abortion. He's a pro-choice person. Of course he is. Totally.
Oh, I know. But, Vance might
Vance
want to...
Vance too, though. Can I say something about Vance? Mm-hmm. Why is he Trump's VP? Because like Trump, he's a Democrat.
Oh, yeah.
The Democrats have taken over the Republican Party, and that's why the Democrats are so upset about Trump and Vance. Because they are Democrats who have left the fold and who are opposing, they're Democrats who are opposing the Democrats and who effected a hostile takeover of the other party in order to do this inter-Democrat fight. Because that's what it is. That's what it is.
Right. And this is why the Never Trumpers are so upset. And,
exactly. Whatever happens to our Republican Party, well, yeah.
And now let's see if we can take over the Democratic Party.
Yeah, of course.
Of
course. This is realignment. Mm-hmm. This has happened many times in American politics. The last time it happened was in the 60s. And what I'll say is that the New Left was a phenomenon of that realignment, of the crisis of the New Deal coalition, in the same way that the Millennial Left was a phenomenon of the crisis of capitalist politics with the crisis of neoconservatism, war on terror, and neoliberalism, Great Recession. In other words, these left bubbles that you see are expressions of something. Not economic crisis, political crisis. Political crisis.
Mm-hmm. Coming down the road after an economic
Not in the
crisis.
60s, though. Not in the 60s.
Right.
Affluence. But there was a political crisis. And it was a political crisis of affluence, namely civil rights movement, meaning blacks are now affluent. They're in the working class. They're in the middle class. Why are they being treated like sharecroppers? That's where the civil rights movement comes from. The laws... Right. Like, there was a civil rights movement when blacks were sharecroppers because there was no basis for a social movement. When they joined the working class and the middle class, the professional class, then there was a basis for a social movement.
Right.
Against Jim Crow. When they're sharecroppers, no. When you're an illiterate sharecropper, you're not starting a social movement, I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah, so I get it. And this is, it's like it's news to me, and yet it's not news to me. I knew,
Yeah, you know this.
Yeah, but you're putting it together.
Right.
But okay, so right, the question for us now, I guess, from my Marxist paranoid Gita board influenced Marxist perspective, to go back to
I was trying to toss you the rational kernel of it. Let's see if you can run with it.
Let's see if I can. Well, all right. So what I feel like we have here is an opportunity during this realignment to question aspects of the state which have seemingly been permanent and unquestionable and opaque to us, which are becoming revealed right now. Yeah. And this assassination attempt is part of that. In my, maybe it's the wrong thing to focus on. Maybe
No, I mean, it shows
you're
something.
paranoid.
We have to take everything that happens as an opportunity to see how things work. And what
Right.
we're going to find is that the difference between intention and incompetence is non-existent.
Right.
Meaning, I always like to say they might have let Martin Luther King be killed.
Right.
How? In other words, intentionally, incompetently, does it matter? Right? In other words,
it's a combination of intentional incompetence. You ask, can we get more Secret Service protection, please? And they say no, for no good reason, violating their own protocols. Are they also saying we need you to have less security because we have somebody who's planning to come and get you?
No, that's different.
Maybe not, but they definitely are making you more vulnerable.
So here's my most compelling item of datum on the conspiracy. It might be the case, I don't know if this has been fully revealed, but there's some like whistleblower stuff, there's something anyway, there's some congressional investigation. Secret Service officials might have been involved in the drafting of the legislation by the Democrats to strip Trump of his Secret Service protection.
Oh.
Yes. Because they were like, look, we're a law enforcement agency. We're not here to defend a convicted felon. So, of course, and that's not just professional ethics. They're Democrats, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
And they're just like, okay, we don't like having to defend Trump, to provide protection for Trump. Now we have an in for dropping that protection. The Democrats in Congress tried to promote legislation, and Secret Service officials, like I write in my article, Why Not Trump Again, themselves drafted that legislation to remove Secret Service protection from Trump.
Mm-hmm.
That's about as close to a conspiracy theory I can come, I think, in terms of rationally. Right now, right? But rationally, like in terms of thinking about how that works, meaning probably there were unenthusiastic defenders of Trump, the protection detail to begin with. I mean, probably it's a mixed bag, but maybe senior leadership of the Secret Service was unenthusiastic about protecting Trump anyway. And so does that mean things get neglected? Shit happens? Maybe. Maybe. I don't know. But it could also just be just garden variety incompetence. Like I heard that there was a guy stationed in a perch in a building overlooking, he would have seen the assassin, but it got too hot, and so he left the post. Because I'm sure it did get too hot.
Right.
Because some warehouse, and he was probably like, yeah, nobody's going to shoot Trump.
The question for us is, should Marxists want presidential candidates to be protected by the Secret Service competently or not?
Yeah, and I think so. In order to, look, politics does involve things like this, assassinations. It does. Mm-hmm. It does. So I also wrote about that, right? Like, look, maybe we are still living in the Roman Republic. The Founding Fathers thought so in a way. And, assassination's part of it. Aaron Burr, Alexander Hamilton, this is maybe politics. It is. So there's that. But then there is this question, which is to say, what is the role of the state? And, maybe socialists should demand, even though we know better, we know that the state is a self-interested, corrupt creature of capitalism. Mm-hmm. But maybe we should demand that they be responsible civil servants and that they protect all presidential or any political candidate. I mean, the thing is, they don't, right? So it's not like, when I think of assassination, I don't think of presidents. I think of local politicians. I think of candidates for local office. And they might, get bumped off. They might be, grabbed by a mob and lynched. That's politics. If you look at like the Reconstruction era, the most democratic period in U.S. history, actually. Well, there was a lot of that. There's a lot of popular violence. And my attitude about that is no one has any business running for office.
Mm-hmm.
Don't run for office unless you have enough social support to protect you. Meaning, don't run for office unless you have people in civil society who are willing to take a bullet for you. If you don't have that kind of support, don't run for office. Because you know what? When you're running for office, you're running for power, you're running to be in a position to make life and death decisions about people. That means you are putting your life in jeopardy. You enter the political realm, you are putting your life in jeopardy. Absolutely. And you have no business doing it because you can't serve as a responsible politician if you're vulnerable. So don't be a politician unless you have a social movement behind you.
Right.
You know?
Right. But I hear that and I say, okay, I can accept that. But I also think
it's not a technocratic thing. It's not like I have an idea, so I'm going to run for office and I'll see how many votes I get. It's got to be more like based in society. Otherwise, what do we, and especially like socialists, what we need to understand is that socialists are not just like Jacobin magazine subscribers who want this policy instead of that policy. No, let's take ourselves seriously. That's what it means to be like a revolutionary. Don't be a revolutionary unless you have social support, unless you have social backing, unless you have people who are going to defend you from some random act of violence. Otherwise, you have no business entering the political sphere at all, because what are you? You're just like a technocrat? Just work your way up to bureaucracy. You're not a politician.
I want to say that there should be enough security and civility in society for people to be political. Maybe
I like stability, I do, but we have to understand that people are going to
Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me get to the point.
Sorry.
For instance, so that there could be people like who are journalists and exposing corruption, that without needing to have enough social support.
But they know that they're putting their life in jeopardy too. They know that. Right. They know. In other words, if you go, what is it? What's the movie about the woman who exposed the corruption at the nuclear power plant?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, look, you ain't playing. Like, if you're going to expose a multi-billion-dollar corporation that employs thousands of people, of course your life is nothing in comparison to that. Of course. One person's life next to thousands of people providing electricity on a power grid serving millions of people, of course your life is nothing. Right. Are you serving a public function? Yes, but understand what you're up against.
Right, which is why we need to have a civil society, which
here's where John Bunch might be right, by the way. There's no such thing as civil society. It's all red in tooth and claw. Meaning civil society doesn't mean everybody acts civilly. It doesn't mean like a debating club. It doesn't.
Right. But it should mean that people value journalism, getting the truth, thinking beyond their narrow self-interests, looking to the totality of society to understand what
maybe journalists is heroic because they're putting their life in danger. And because if they are killed, their work will have been worth it, and people will remember their sacrifice and honor it. No, I mean, serious. I'm quite serious. Look, this kind of, like we were talking about fanboys, this kind of hobby leftism, guess what? It's not.
Well, the problem is that today, when during the time of Nixon, when Woodward and Bernstein were going up against the presidency, well, there are a lot of things going on behind the scenes to make that possible. But they also had a newspaper behind them, a readership behind them.
More or less. Did you see The Gray Lady?
No.
The movie with Meryl Streep as the owner of the Washington Post at the time of the Watergate revelation. It's interesting. Yeah. It's a drama, because she's like a super wealthy, patrician class, owner of the newspaper, and she has to decide, right? Okay, am I going to wreck the newspaper over this?
Yes, right. But now,
including, is she going to put her own life in danger potentially too?
Right. But okay, right.
She's a wealthy person. She's an heiress, like a serious ruling class person.
Right. But the idea is that if we have enough eyes on someone, I've just watched JFK. There's a scene where Donald Sutherland is talking to Kevin Costner. He's X, and I had something drop back there. So Donald Sutherland is talking to Kevin Costner. He's Mr. X, and he's saying to him, "Listen, do you understand what you're up against? Do you understand what you've done? Right now, you have to go further, because if you step back, you're a dead man. You have eyes on you. You're in the public sphere. They can't take you out at this moment.
Because it will pose questions."
Right.
Not because they dare not, but because it won't serve their interests. But as soon as you recede from the public view, then they can off you.
Right. And what I'm saying is that when there was a newspaper culture, getting into that position where you at least had eyes on you, and you had, Do you
remember the WikiLeaks thing?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the staffer for the Hillary campaign who was found dead?
Seth Rich.
Yeah.
Right.
No, seriously. Do you know that these Boeing whistleblowers are all ending up dead too?
No, I didn't know that.
Have you heard about that? Yeah.
No.
No.
But what I do know is that now
this is why we need a socialist party, because we can't be heroic individuals about this.
Right. What I'm saying is now we have a moment, though, this is what I'm trying to get to, where rather than being in a newspaper with some clout behind you and a public readership, we have a situation where we've got a Substack journalist.
No, we talked about how Taibbi, might have had reason to be worried.
Right. Right. And also that situation pushes you, kind of forces you to seek shelter with one or the other parties too, I think. Because
more or less effectively. I'm not sure that these parties are too good at protecting their own either. Meaning, like, finding protection, finding patronage, but of course they're just going to use you.
Right.
In other words, is there any loyalty involved? Is there any loyalty? I mean, look at what happened with Biden. Did I say?
Right.
I admire him clinging to power, not because I admire him clinging to power. Obviously, he wasn't clinging to power because of personal anything. He thought he's the guy to beat Trump in the election. He really believed that. He thought he's the only one who can do it. He might have been right.
He might have been.
But I admire that because, like, all the support fell away and all he had was the power of his office. And he's like, fuck, that's all I need. I'm running for a re-election. Fuck it.
Right.
You got to admire that.
But he was wrong. Why do you think that
they gave him COVID.
wasn't? Oh, I don't know about that. I think
they sent some Zoomer staffer who had COVID to go give him a piece of paper. It's easy to do. It's easy to do.
Sure. But I mean, that might have happened. But I also heard.
No, I actually don't think so. But I thought, how funny. I thought, this China virus, this biological warfare, it has many uses, doesn't it?
Yes, that's true. But I think that they were threatening to throw him out of office. I think they were going to evoke the
25th Amendment. Yeah, they wouldn't have gotten away with that. Not quite. And Kamala wouldn't have done it. I don't think that Kamala ousted him. I don't.
No, I don't think Kamala did. It was supposedly, the story is it was Pelosi and Obama.
But Kamala would have had to go along with any 25th Amendment thing.
Right.
I think they convinced him. And I don't think it was too mafiosi. It might have been a little bit. I don't know if they used Hunter or used the corruption scandal more generally. I don't know. But I also think, he might have just made a decision. Especially after the Trump assassination attempt. He might have been like, look, we need a reset in this election. Meaning that if it's me versus him, then maybe I can't win now that he's got this halo of martyrdom around him. And so maybe we need to just change the frame entirely, That might have been it. I mean, I guess we will never know, but I think it did come down to his decision. And obviously, these are gangsters. They are. I just don't want to overplay that idea. And also, when you're gangsters at that level, you don't have to actually do very much to exercise the power that you have. Mm-hmm. It's not like they really needed to twist his arm terribly much, right? They pressured him. I think, it's at a certain level, you got to take the official narrative at face value. And, they went to meet with him. They talked with him. He said no, he's staying. And they went back and talked to him more. And people changed their minds. I think Hakeem Jeffries was calling for him to step down, but then changed his mind and said, no, I'm riding with Biden. He did the same thing as Clyburn. James Clyburn. And so, I think it was very fluid. I think it did ultimately probably come to his decision. I mean, what was Tucker running around saying that he didn't write the letter? And then they were saying, well, we need proof of life. We need proof that Biden's actually alive. And then there was the stuff about like comparing the signatures. It's not really a signature. I'm like, no, come on.
But there is a question. Why wasn't there letterhead on it? And why did he just drop it on Twitter that way rather than making some sort of public announcement and, that kind of thing?
No, he probably had laryngitis from COVID. I'm sure he wanted to look good. He wanted to be dignified. I mean, and anyway, it's just a few days. He's going to speak tomorrow night.
No, I think it's tonight.
Oh, excuse me. Netanyahu is tomorrow night. Right. Tonight is Biden. Tomorrow is Netanyahu. And we can talk about that for a second.
Do you think Kamala switched the frame? Do you think it worked? As the halo knocked off of Trump now?
Yeah. I think it pushes the assassination attempt out of the news cycle to a certain extent. Obviously, the Republicans tried to keep it going with the interrogation of the Secret Service director, right? And so they're vying for the news cycle, the attention, but I mean, I think what we have to look at is the opacity. And the opacity is not like, okay, we're on the outside and we don't see what's going on the inside. That's not what's meant. Opacity means that the principals, the people, the principal actors involved themselves can't be sure what's really going on. Right? That's what we're really dealing with. And it's not what's going on in terms of who's doing what, but the significance of their actions. And that's where I feel like, to get back to the point we were making before, it's not like, our techno-feudal overlords are really in the driver's seat. And they really are running the show and they really know what they're doing. They don't. The fundamental Marxist idea of capitalism is, well, it's a twofold thing. First of all, bourgeois society wasn't masterminded like that either. It's more organically spontaneous in its character. It's the invisible hand. It is. They were right about that. It is the invisible hand, and that's good. That's freedom. That's not unfreedom. That's freedom. So that's like kind of positive alienation, meaning that society has a will that is other than the will of its members. And that's actually a good thing, because that is our freedom, in fact. It means that there's a transcendental character to society, social action, that is not reducible to the foibles of individuals. Now, that's true in capitalism too, but this is wrinkle, which is that it's capitalism. In other words, it's not the general will of society that transcends the self-interest and the private vice that yields public benefits and public virtue, the Bernard Mandeville fable of the bees idea. It's not that, it's capitalism, meaning we're serving surplus value accumulation. That's the problem. And in other words, the fact that human intentions and human efforts might come to grief, well, that's a story that's thousands of years old. We're talking about something much more recent and specific, capitalism. And that capital accumulation is what's bringing us to grief. And we might be able to do something about that. Right? That's the wager. It's actually quite a modest wager. Unfortunately, it does involve a kind of political ambition that might seem unrealistic to people. But I mean, look, these political parties are just people, and they depend on their organization and their clarity of purpose. And yes, it doesn't work out, but to do anything at all, to be able to do anything, whether it works or not, to even try to do something, takes a political effort.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what socialism's going to take. And it's not going to be the effort of like people signing up for the DSA because they don't like Trump.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.